Hi. Today is Good Friday. It is the day that we remember when Jesus died. And that's a sad day for so many, but it's also a happy day in an Easter kind of way. And that's a great mystery. So today I have 3 stories, and one of those stories has lots of stories inside of it to share with you. You can watch part of it and then pause and watch more later, or you can watch it all together. But I really wanted to share all of these stories with you on this special holy day so that we can really get ready for our big celebration on Sunday morning. So I'm going to change the camera angle, and I'm going to start with our stories of the faces of Easter. And we remember that the faces of Easter tell the stories of Jesus over 6 weeks, which is how long we celebrate the season of Lent when we're getting ready to enter the great mystery of Easter. So let me change my camera angle. Oh, hello. Get all that mess in there. Don't mind the mess. Don't mind the mess. Okay. The first thing we're going to do, of course, is to light our Christ candle, to remember that the light of Christ is always with us, wherever we go, especially when we share the stories of God and God's people. The first week in the season of Lent, we remember the baby. In the beginning, God chose Mary to be the mother of God. Listen carefully to the words. God chose Mary to be the mother of God, and the Word was born a wordless child. When the baby looked into the face of the mother Mary, he saw the cross already. And when he looked into the face of the father Joseph, the cross was there too. The mother Mary and the father Joseph kept the baby safe. They kept the baby warm. They gave the baby all he needed to grow, and he began to grow. Oh my goodness. I apologize. The second week in the season of Lent, we remember when the baby Jesus grew and became a boy. And when he was about 12 years old, he went with the mother Mary and the father Joseph, and with many people from their village of Nazareth into the great city of Jerusalem to celebrate a high holy day. When the celebrations were over, all the people from Nazareth went back through the great high gate on their way home, and suddenly Mary and Joseph noticed that Jesus was not with them. They thought he had been playing with the other children from their village. They raced back into the city. They looked into the dark and narrow streets. They looked where they had slept. They looked where they had bought their food in the marketplaces. They looked everywhere, and finally, they found him in the temple. He was speaking with the priests, the rabbis, and when he spoke, they listened because he knew so much. And when they spoke, he listened because he wanted to know more. Mary and Joseph then asked Jesus the question all parents ask their children, the question you can never answer. Why did you do this? Jesus said something very strange. He said, "Didn't you know I would be in my Father's house?" Mary and Joseph didn't understand. Their home was in Nazareth, where Joseph's carpenter's shop was. They didn't understand, but they didn't forget. Jesus continued to grow and became a man, and when he was about 30 years old, he went down to the river Jordan, where his cousin John was baptizing people. Jesus came up to John and said, "Baptize me." And John suddenly saw Jesus as if for the very first time. Suddenly knew who he really was. "No, you are the Messiah," "The one we have been waiting for, you must baptize me." And Jesus said, "No. It is written that you will prepare the way for me. You must baptize me." Jesus went down into the chaos and the darkness of the water. And when he came back up, there were people there that day that said they saw a dove come down from heaven and come close to Jesus. There were also people there that heard a voice that said, "This is my son. Listen to him." Jesus came out of the river Jordan and went across it and into the desert to learn more about who he was and what his work was going to be. Jesus spent 40 days and 40 nights in the desert, and there was very little to eat or drink. One day, a voice came and said, "If you are really the Son of God, why don't you turn those stones into bread and have something to eat?" And Jesus said, "No. A real human being needs more than just bread to eat." Then it was as if Jesus was on top of the great temple in Jerusalem. The voice came back and said, "Why don't you throw yourself over and see if God sends his angels to rescue you before you hit the rocks below?" Jesus said, "No, we do not need to test God." Then it was as if Jesus was overlooking all the kingdoms in all the world, and the voice came back again. "If you follow me, I will make you king over all these kingdoms." And Jesus said, "No, I am to be king, but not that kind of king." He went back out of the desert and began to do his work. But what was his work? His work was to come close to people, especially people no one else wanted to come close to. Jesus traveled about the land with the 12. He was teaching and showing people how to be real human beings. And as he taught, people came to him to be healed. If they were hurt or sick or upset in some way, they sensed that Jesus could help them be well. Do you see? He has come close to this blind man in the picture. He is even touching the blind man's eyes. When Jesus came close to people, they changed. They could see things they never saw before. They could do things they never did before. They became well. But that wasn't all Jesus did. Jesus also told parables. Finally, he knew that he had to become a parable. So he and the 12 turned toward Jerusalem for the last time. The 5th week in the season of Lent, we remember when Jesus went to Jerusalem for the last time. It was the time of the Passover, and the city was full of people from many different lands. The people thought he was coming to be king, but they weren't paying attention. He wasn't riding on a great white horse. He wasn't being carried by soldiers. He was riding on a donkey. The donkey wasn't even his. He borrowed it. Still, that Sunday, when Jesus came into Jerusalem, people waved palm branches, which were a sign of kings. On Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, Jesus went into the temple to teach. One day when he was there, he said, "Do you see that old woman over there? She's going to put something in the money box. Listen, did you hear anything?" "No." She put the tiniest of all the coins in the box. That was all the money she had. Now here comes a rich man. He has so much money to put. He brought friends with him to help him carry it. His money clangs and clatters as they pour it into the box. Jesus asked, "Now I wonder, which one really gave the most?" That was how he taught. On Thursday evening, Jesus and the 12 hurried through the dark streets to a house. They climbed up the stairs to an upper room and shared their Last Supper together. After supper, Jesus took some bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it and said something like, "Whenever you break the bread like this and share it, I will be there." He also took a cup of wine, gave thanks to God for it, and said, "Whenever you share a cup of wine like this, I will be there." What was he talking about? He was always saying things like that. Suddenly, Judas got up and left, and the rest went to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus wanted to pray. When he was finished, he joined the rest, but Judas came out of the dark and greeted him. This was a signal for the temple guards to come out of the shadows and take Jesus away. The night was a confusing one. The next day, Jesus was taken outside the city and crucified. That afternoon, Jesus died. The sky grew dark. Jesus was taken down from the cross and buried in a cave. A great stone was rolled into the opening of the cave to close it like a door. Saturday was so quiet, you could almost hear the earth breathing. On Sunday, it was the women who had the courage to go to the tomb just to be close to Jesus. They wanted to remember him, even if it felt sad. When they came to the tomb, they found that the stone had been rolled back and that the tomb was empty. Jesus had died on the cross, but somehow he was still with them, as he is with us, especially in the bread and the wine. When we remember that Jesus died on the cross for us, we also remember that he is still with us. You can't have one without the other. You can't pull them apart. That is the mystery of Easter. It includes all the sadness and all the happiness that could ever be. And that is why the mystery is so huge. Now, for Good Friday, today, I would also love to share the story with you of Jesus and Jerusalem, to show you a little bit more, a little bit closer look of how Jesus and the 12 made their way around Jerusalem. So we'll put away this story. We'll keep out our Christ candle. And we'll move on to our next story. About 1,000 years before Jesus was born, King David took the city from the Jebusite people and made it his own. It was there that his son, King Solomon, built the first temple. Let's make sure we can see this whole map. Don't want you to miss anything. And let me try to make it a little bit more clear. Okay. The temple was burned by the Babylonians. They took many people who lived in Jerusalem into exile. And when they returned, the temple was rebuilt.
It was rebuilt again and expanded by King Herod by the time Jesus was born. Here are the walls of the city. Here is the temple. Here is where the upper room was, as much as anyone can remember from so many centuries ago. Here is the Roman fortress of Antonia. Can you see it? Right about here, above where the temple was. Here is the palace of the high priest, Caiaphas. Here is Herod's palace. The Kidron Valley, right here, ran along the east side of the city. Some say a bridge might have connected the city to the Mount of Olives, which is here, but others are not so sure. This is where the Garden of Gethsemane was, and still is today. Here is Golgotha, the place of the skull, where Jesus died on the cross for us. There. Jesus went to Jerusalem many times, even as a baby and as a boy. Once, the Mother Mary and the Father Joseph found him in the temple area, talking to the priests. This story is about the last time Jesus went to Jerusalem. We remember it every year during the time we call Holy Week. Jesus and the 12 came from Galilee along the twisting Jordan River to Jericho. He healed the blind man Bartimaeus and had supper there with Zacchaeus. When they left Jericho, they crossed the low desert and began to go up towards the city. Perhaps Jesus and the disciples spent the Sabbath at rest in Bethany. On Sunday, Jesus sent 2 of the disciples ahead to borrow a donkey. He rode the donkey into the city. Now, if you can see these little gates, what we hear in the Bible that he came in through the great high gate of the city. He rode the donkey probably through one of these southern gates and made his way along the pilgrim route through the oldest part of the city, up toward the Temple Mount, which is here. Some people noticed this. They thought he might be the Messiah, so they cut palm branches and waved them and threw their coats on the path and shouted, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Others were opening their shops. Fruit, cheese, wine, and bread were being set out on rough wooden tables to sell. Jesus and the 12 climbed up the limestone slabs that made a street of steps until they came to an open area. They must have left the donkey there and decided to enter the temple to pray. Perhaps they went in through the double gate right here. Can't make you quite able to see it. If I turn the light off, it helps. Well, right there is the double gate. Perhaps they went in through the double gate right here. They could have also gone out the outside into the outside steps. But they could not go into the triple gate because that was just for the priests. When they reached the Temple Mount, they came out into the broad, open courtyard and crossed it to enter the temple to pray. When their prayers were finished, they left the Temple Mount and went outside the city wall. Across the Kidron Valley, right here, to the Mount of Olives to spend the night. On Monday morning, Jesus probably went again to the Temple Mount and began to pray and teach. He no doubt taught where the other rabbis were teaching, along the southwestern part of the great courtyard, called the Court of the Gentiles, around here. That evening, they went back to the Mount of Olives to sleep. On Tuesday, perhaps they came up the stairs inside the Temple Mount and into the long royal portico right here, where the Sanhedrin met at the far end. The money changers and merchants were there, and Jesus became angry about all this buying and selling in such a holy place. He turned over the tables for money changing and upset those selling birds in little cages and other animals for sacrifices. He called for the people to keep the temple a place of prayer. The guards began to watch him carefully. They also noticed how the crowds listening to him were growing. Jesus and the 12 returned that evening to the Mount of Olives, perhaps even to Bethany, to sleep. The people watched them cross the Kidron Valley again and began to talk about the legend that the Mount of Olives was where the Messiah was to come down from heaven and lead an army of angels to drive away the Roman soldiers. On Wednesday, the crowds listening grew larger, and the guards became worried. They began to think about how to arrest him. That evening, Jesus and the 12 crossed over to the Mount of Olives once more. Perhaps as the sun set, Jesus sat on the hillside across from the temple. with Peter, Andrew, James, and John. They asked him privately what was going to happen. On Thursday, the guards were ready to take Jesus, but he did not appear on the Temple Mount. The disciples asked Jesus where they would keep the Passover. He told them to go into the city and look for a man carrying a water jar. He would show them. They climbed up the stairs to an upper room and had their Last Supper together. After they had everything they wanted to eat, Jesus shared the bread and the wine with them and said that he would always be with them, especially in the bread and the wine. They did not understand what he meant, but they would not forget. He also told them to love one another, and he showed them how to care for each other by washing their feet. After that, Judas hurried away into the darkness of the city. The rest went back to the Mount of Olives. Now it was late. You could barely see the lights of Jerusalem across the way. Jesus went into the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, while the disciples fell asleep. When Jesus came back from his prayers, the soldiers from the temple came out of the darkness and took him away. Judas was with them and showed Jesus to them. They took him back into the city and finally to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. Then the priests asked him questions, but he did not answer. Finally, the high priest tore his robes and cried out, "Blasphemy!" They convicted Jesus of the crime of pretending to be God. After that, the temple guards probably took Jesus to a jail near the fortress of Antonia, which is all the way back up here. There. So he started down here, and then they took him up here. On Friday morning, Jesus was brought to Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate asked Jesus questions. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You have said so," but had nothing else to say. When Jesus would not answer, Pilate sent him to Herod, back this way, there, near the upper room, a son of Herod the Great, who built the temple and had died about 30 years before. Herod grew tired of him and sent him back to Pilate at the fortress of Antonia. Pilate then showed Jesus to the crowd. There was a tradition to release a prisoner at the time of the Passover. Pilate asked the crowd if he should release Jesus or Barabbas, and they shouted, "Barabbas." The soldiers prepared Jesus to be crucified, and then they took him through the streets to Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Where they hung him on a cross, and he died. People still walk along these streets to remember Jesus and pray. Today, they move from a school where the Roman fortress used to be, along the Via Dolorosa, the street of sadness, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. After Jesus died, the disciples took him down from the cross and placed him in a tomb nearby, given by Joseph of Arimathea. A great stone was rolled in front of the opening to close it like a locked door. On Saturday evening, everything was quiet. On Sunday, the women had the courage to go to the tomb just to be close to Jesus. When they got there, they found that the stone had been rolled away and discovered that somehow he was still with them, as he is with us today. Now, I wonder what part of that story you liked best. I wonder how they did all that walking every day. I wonder what we would see if we went to this place now. I wonder how you know that Jesus is still with us, just as he was with them. I have one more story before we go on this Good Friday. And this story is more like a legend, which is a story that helps us understand more, but isn't necessarily exactly factually accurate. But this is a lovely story, and you have a part to play in this story as well. This is the time that you get to work with your eggs. So you can pause this and go and find your egg and your colored pencils and your pages about eggs, and then come right back. Hey, here's the paper that you might have in your packet with different kinds of painted eggs. And on the back, there are places where you can practice designing your own painted eggs. And all along here are descriptions of what different illustrations symbolize. You also should have an egg. Maybe it looks like this, and some colored pencils, or if you prefer, you may use markers or paint. Just speak with your families and find out what works best for you. Now, if you have all of that together, I'm ready to begin. There was once an old man and an old woman who lived just outside the walls of the great city of Jerusalem, just like we just talked about. They had everything they needed: a cow to give them milk, a garden to give them vegetables, and chickens to give eggs. In the morning, the old man would go to the hen house. "Good morning, hens. May I have some of your eggs?" They gladly gave him their eggs. There were so many. On some days, the old man took them into the city to sell. One day, he went into the city with a basket full of eggs, covered with a white cloth. As he came closer to one of the wide streets, there was a huge crowd. He pushed his way through the crowd to see what was going on. The Roman soldiers were taking 3 people along the street to crucify them outside the city walls. They carried the crosses they were to be nailed to. One of them stumbled and almost fell. The old man stepped out from the crowd and caught the heavy wooden beam before the man fell, and together they carried the piece of wood outside the walls. The old man stayed all afternoon, even when the sky grew dark and it began to rain. He watched the mother and others standing there. They were watching the man in the middle. Finally, the man died. They took the man down and carried him away to put him in a stone tomb. The old man started back toward the city. He suddenly remembered his eggs. Where were they? He turned the corner and looked at the place where he had put the basket, thinking surely it must be gone. And it was there. He went over to the basket. The white covering was still there, but he knew the eggs underneath would be gone. He reached under the white cover. There was something there. When he pulled out one of the eggs, he could not believe his eyes. It was like a jewel. The basket was full of beautiful eggs, covered with colors and designs. Something not only sad but wonderful had happened that day, and the eggs proclaimed it, with colors instead of with words. And ever since then, people have colored eggs at Easter time. Here's another one. They put designs on the eggs that help show the mystery of Easter. These eggs that we have here are real painted Ukrainian eggs. And you may see there's a little hole right here. That's because it's a real egg. They put a hole in and got all this stuff out and then painted it with enamel, which helps keep it safe. We keep this one in this box to make sure that we always have it to look at when we want to. And you can create your own egg to help you remember the mystery of Easter. And you can use these ideas, or you can use your own ideas. And remember that this special, holy, and sad day is part of how we get to have our special, holy, and pure celebration day this Sunday. So I hope you have a wonderful evening with your families, and I look forward to celebrating with you on Sunday morning. Goodbye.